The morning sun spilled through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the hardwood floor of my living room. At 85, I'd grown to cherish these quiet moments sipping chamomile tea, the steam curling upward like a whisper of memory. My name is Evelyn Harper, and this house, with its creaking floors and faded wallpaper, has been my sanctuary for 6 decades. It's where I raised 3 children, buried a husband, and pieced myself back together through every storm life threw my way. But today, the air felt heavier, laced with a tension I couldn't quite name. My children, Margaret, Thomas, and Claire, were coming over. They'd called it a family meeting, a phrase that carried the weight of formality I wasn't used to. We'd always been close, or so I thought. But lately, their visits had grown sparse, their calls clipped, their eyes avoiding mine. I'd chalked it up to their busy lives, Margaret with her law firm, Thomas with his tech startup, Claire with her endless charity galas. Still, something gnawed at me, a mother's instinct that never dulled, even with age. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. I smoothed my cardigan, took a steadying breath, and opened the door. Margaret stood there, her tailored blazer pristine, her lips a thin line. Thomas was behind her, scrolling on his phone, his jaw tight. Claire, the youngest, offered a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. They filed in, their footsteps echoing like a jury entering a courtroom. "Mom, we need to talk," Margaret said, her voice clipped, professional. She sat at the dining table, pulling out a folder thick with papers. My heart sank. I'd seen that look before when she'd negotiated her first big case. All steel and strategy. Thomas and Claire flanked her, their silence louder than words. "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly as I set down my teacup. Margaret didn't meet my gaze. "We're worried about you, Mom. Living alone. Managing this house site's too much. We've been discussing options." "Options?" I echoed, the word tasting bitter. Thomas finally looked up from his phone. "A facility, Mom. Somewhere they can look after you properly. You're not getting any younger." I stared at him, my middle child, the one who'd once clung to my skirt during thunderstorms. "I'm 85, Thomas. Not dead. This is my home." Claire reached for my hand, her touch hesitant. "We just want what's best for you. There've been incidents." The stove left on, the bills piling up. I pulled my hand back, the sting of her words sharper than I expected. "The stove was one time, Claire. And the bills are paid. I'm managing just fine." Margaret opened the folder, sliding a document toward me. "We've consulted a lawyer. We're petitioning for a competency evaluation. It's for your safety, Mom." The room spun. Competency. The word landed like a blow, stripping away the years I'd spent proving my strength raising them alone after David's death, balancing budgets, mending broken hearts. They thought I was incompetent. My own children. I forced a smile, though it felt like shards of glass. "I see. And when is this evaluation?" "Next week," Margaret said, her tone final. "We've arranged for Dr. Larson to assess you." Dr. Larson, my doctor of 20 years, the one who'd seen me through pneumonia, grief, and every ache of aging. I nodded, my mind racing. They thought they'd cornered me, but they'd forgotten who I was. I'd survived worse than this, and I wasn't about to let my children me own flesh and blood strip me of my dignity. That night, alone in my bedroom, I sat at my desk, the same one where I'd written letters to David during the war. I pulled out a notebook and began to plan. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. But it wouldn't be loud or reckless. It would be calculated, deliberate, the way I'd always faced life's battles. The next morning, I called Dr. Larson's office. His receptionist, Judy, was a sweet girl who always remembered my birthday. Evelyn, you're not due for a checkup, she said, confused. I know, Judy, but I need to see him. It's urgent. I spent the week preparing. I organized my finances, dusted off old journals, and even baked a batch of oatmeal cookies, Margaret's favorite, a quiet reminder of the mother I'd always been. By the time the evaluation day arrived, I was ready. My children thought they'd written the end of my story. They were about to learn I was still holding the pen. The doctor's office was sterile, all white walls and antiseptic smells. Dr. Larson, with his kind eyes and graying beard, greeted me warmly. Evelyn, what's this all about? Your kids requested this evaluation, but I told them I've never seen a sharper mind. I smiled, my resolve hardening. Let's make sure they know that, shall we? The evaluation was thorough memory tests, problem solving, even questions about my daily routines. I answered each one with clarity, drawing on a lifetime of discipline. When it was over, Dr. Larson patted my hand. You're as sharp as ever, Evelyn. I'll have the report ready by tomorrow. As I left his office, the weight of the week lifted. My children had underestimated me, but I wasn't angry, not yet. I was determined. They'd see the report, and they'd see me. Not just their mother, but Evelyn Harper, the woman who'd built a life from nothing and wasn't about to let it go. The report arrived the next day, delivered by courier in a crisp white envelope. I held it in my hands, the paper cool against my skin, and felt a flicker of triumph. Dr. Larson's words were clear. Evelyn Harper demonstrates full cognitive capacity, with exceptional memory and problem-solving skills for her age. She is entirely competent to manage her affairs. I read it twice, letting the words sink in. This was my shield, my proof. But it wasn't enough to simply have it. I needed to wield it. I called another family meeting. Margaret protested, saying they were busy, but I insisted. It's important, I said, my voice firm. They arrived that evening, their faces a mix of impatience and curiosity. The dining table was set with the same oatmeal cookies I'd baked, their scent filling the room. I wanted them to remember who I was, not just the frail woman they'd decided I'd become. Mom, what's this about? Thomas asked, his tone edged with irritation. He hadn't touched the cookies. I slid the report across the table, its pages neatly bound. Read this, I said, meeting their eyes one by one. Dr. Larson's evaluation. I passed with flying colors. Margaret's face tightened as she scanned the document. Claire fidgeted, her fingers twisting a napkin. Thomas leaned back, arms crossed, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. You went behind our backs? Margaret asked, her voice low, almost accusing. No, I said calmly. You arranged the evaluation. I simply showed up and proved you wrong. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. I let it linger, letting them feel the weight of their miscalculation. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice small. We were just worried. Mom, we thought it was for the best. For the best. I repeated, my voice steady but laced with hurt. You thought taking my home, my independence, was for the best. Did you ever ask me what I wanted? Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Mom, you're 85. Things happen. We didn't want you to get hurt. And yet, I said, tapping the report, I'm not the one who's been careless here. Margaret's jaw clenched, but she didn't argue. She was too smart for that, knew the report was ironclad. Still, I saw the flicker of shame in her eyes, and it cut deeper than I expected. These were my children, the ones I'd rocked to sleep, taught to read, cheered at every milestone. How had we come to this? I'm not angry, I said, though the lie tasted bitter. But I need you to understand something. This house, this life fight's mine. I've earned it, and I'm not ready to give it up. The conversation that followed was strained but necessary. They apologized, haltingly at first, then with more sincerity as the evening wore on. Claire cried, saying she'd only wanted to protect me. Thomas admitted they'd acted too quickly, swayed by fear and assumptions. Margaret was the hardest to crack, her pride a wall, but even she softened, promising to listen next time. As they left, the house felt quieter than usual, the silence both a relief and a wound. I sat in my armchair, the report still on the table, and let myself feel the ache. They'd hurt me, yes, but they were still my children, and I was still their mother, with all the love and forgiveness that came with it. The days that followed were a return to routine, but with a new undercurrent of purpose. I started inviting neighbors over for tea, something I hadn't done in years. I joined a book club at the library, where I found myself debating novels with women half my age. I even began writing again, scribbling memories in my notebook not just for me, but for my grandchildren, so they'd know who I was beyond the frail figure their parents saw. But the victory of the report wasn't the end. I knew my children's fears wouldn't vanish overnight, nor would the gap between us. So I decided to bridge it myself. I invited them back, one by one, for dinners, walks, conversations, not to confront, but to reconnect. With Margaret, I asked about her cases, listening to her passion for law. With Thomas, I let him teach me about his latest tech gadget, laughing at my own clumsiness. With Claire, I shared stories of her childhood, reminding her of the mother I'd always been. Each visit chipped away at the distance. They began to see me again not as a problem to be solved, but as Evelyn, their mother, still vibrant, still capable. And I saw them, too, not as adversaries, but as children scared of losing me, grappling with their own mortality. By the time spring arrived, the house felt alive again, filled with their voices, their laughter. The report sat in a drawer now, a reminder of a battle won, but not the war itself. The real fight was for understanding, for love that didn't falter under the weight of age. And in that fight, I was still standing. Spring brought new colors to my garden, the tulips blooming in defiant bursts of red and yellow. I spent mornings tending to them, my knees creaking but my spirit unyielding. At 85, I'd learned to find joy in small acts, pulling weeds, watering blooms, feeling the earth beneath my fingers. But the garden wasn't just a refuge. It was a statement. I was still here, still growing, just like the flowers I'd planted decades ago. My children's visits became more frequent, though the shadow of our earlier clash lingered. Margaret, always the skeptic, watched me closely, as if waiting for a misstep. Thomas was warmer, bringing his kids-me grandchildren whose laughter filled the house with a lightness I'd missed. Claire was the most changed, her guilt softening her edges. She'd linger after dinners, helping with dishes, asking questions about my life before she was born. I welcomed it, but I didn't let my guard down. Trust, once fractured, takes time to rebuild. One afternoon, as I pruned roses, Margaret arrived unannounced. She stood by the gate, her briefcase in hand, looking out of place among the wildflowers. "Mom, can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. I nodded, wiping dirt from my hands, and led her to the porch. She sat, her posture rigid, and pulled out a new set of papers. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face calm. "What now, Margaret?" "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "I've been thinking about what happened. We were wrong, I was wrong. I want to make it right." She slid the papers toward me. Not a legal document this time, but a proposal for a trust fund, one that would let me stay in my home while ensuring my care if I ever needed it. "This isn't about control," she said, her eyes meeting mine. It's about giving you security. On your terms. I read the papers carefully, my years of managing budgets sharpening my focus. It was fair, thoughtful even. But more than the words on the page, it was her tone that struck me humble, almost vulnerable. For the first time in months, I saw my daughter, not the lawyer. Thank you, I said, my voice steady. I'll think it over. But Margaret, what I need most isn't a trust fund. It's your trust in me. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I'm trying, Mom. I really am. That conversation marked a turning point. Margaret began visiting more, not with agendas, but with stories, memories. She even brought old photo albums, and we spent an evening laughing over pictures of her as a gap-toothed kid. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Thomas, too, was making efforts. He surprised me with a smart home system, insisting it would make things easier: motion sensor lights, a voice-activated thermostat. I teased him about turning my house into a spaceship, but I let him install it. Not because I needed it, but because it was his way of showing he cared. And when he saw me mastering the system in a day, his grin was worth every beep and whir. Claire's transformation was the most heartfelt. She started a ritual of Sunday brunches, bringing her famous quiche and stories from her charity work. One morning, as we sat in the kitchen, she confessed, I was so scared of losing you, Mom. That's why I pushed so hard. I thought a facility would keep you safe. I reached for her hand, my grip firm despite the years. Claire, the safest place for me is here, with my family. Not locked away, but living. She nodded, tears spilling over. I get that now. I'm sorry it took so long. These moments weren't just about reconciliation. They were about rediscovery. My children were seeing me as more than an aging mother, and I was seeing them as adults grappling with their own fears. We were rebuilding, not just a family, but a mutual respect that had frayed under the weight of their assumptions. Yet, I knew the world outside my garden still saw me as old. At the book club, I overheard whispers about my age, as if 85 made me fragile. I didn't let it bother me. Instead, I spoke louder, shared bolder opinions, let my voice carry the weight of my years. I wasn't just Evelyn Harper, the widow, the mother. I was Evelyn, the woman who'd survived wars, loss, and now, betrayal, with her head held high. By summer, the house was alive again, not just with my children's visits, but with new connections. I'd started hosting a weekly knitting circle, where women of all ages gathered, swapping stories and stitches. My grandchildren joined sometimes, their small hands fumbling with yarn, their laughter a reminder of why I fought so hard to stay. The doctor's report, now tucked away, had done more than save my home. It had reminded me and my children of my strength. But the real victory wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in showing them who I was. And who we productive. I'm still here. Still capable. Still Evelyn Harper. Summer draped my home in warmth. The kind that sank into your bones and made every moment feel like a gift. At 85, I'd learned to savor these days. The way the sun gilded my garden. The hum of bees. The chatter of my knitting circle. But beneath the surface, there was a new rhythm to my Lithia quiet defiance. A reclamation of my place in the world. The doctor's report had been a turning point, but it was the work I put in afterward, with my children and my community, that was truly reshaping my story. Margaret's trust fund proposal sat on my desk for weeks. I wasn't avoiding it out of spite. I needed time to weigh it, to ensure it aligned with my independence. One evening, I invited her over to discuss it. She arrived with a bottle of my favorite Merlot, a small gesture that felt like an olive branch. We sat on the porch, the air thick with jasmine, and I laid out my terms: full control over my finances, my home, my care decisions. She listened, not as the lawyer, but as my daughter, nodding with a respect I hadn't seen in years. "It's a deal," she said, a rare smile breaking through. "I just want you to feel secure, Mom. Not trapped." We signed the papers that week, a moment that felt less like a concession and more like a partnership. It wasn't about giving up control. It was about building a safety net with my children, not against them. For the first time, I felt they saw me as an equal, not a burden. Thomas took a different approach to mending our bond. He started bringing his kids over every weekend, turning my backyard into a playground. I taught them to plant seeds, just as I had with their father decades ago. One afternoon, as we knelt in the dirt, my granddaughter Lily looked up, her eyes wide. "Grandma, how do you know so much?" I laughed, brushing soil from my hands. "I've had 85 years to learn, sweetheart, and I'm not done yet." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that my knowledge, my stories, were gifts to pass on. I began writing more, not just memories, but lessons, recipes, gardening tips, stories of their grandfather. I wanted my grandchildren to know the woman behind the title of Grandma, the one who'd fought for her place in this house. Claire's Sunday brunches became a cornerstone of my week. She'd arrive with fresh flowers, her quiche, and a willingness to listen. One morning, she brought a photo from my wedding day, 22, radiant beside David. "You were so beautiful," she said, her voice soft. "You still are?" I smiled, touching the photo. "Beauty changes, Claire. Now it's in the lines on my face, the stories behind them." She hugged me, her embrace tight, and I felt the weight of her regret lift. She wasn't just apologizing. She was rebuilding, showing me she valued my presence, my voice. Those brunches became our sanctuary, a place to heal old wounds and forge new memories. The knitting circle grew, too, drawing women from across town. We met in my living room, needles clicking, stories flowing. There was Sarah, a young mother navigating loss. Ellen, a retired teacher with a sharp wit. And Maria, a college student hungry for wisdom. I shared tales of my youth wartime letters, protests in the 60s, raising 3 kids on a shoestring. They listened, not out of pity, but awe. And I realized my age wasn't a limitation. It was a library of experience they craved. One evening, as the circle laughed over a story of my disastrous first attempt at baking, Sarah said, "Evelyn, you should write a book. Your life fight's incredible." The idea stuck. I began outlining a memoir, not for fame, but for legacy. I wrote about the war, David's death, the fight to keep this house. I wrote about my children's betrayal, not with bitterness, but with honesty, showing the pain and the redemption. It was cathartic, a way to process the hurt and celebrate the triumph. By fall, the house was more than a home. It was a hub. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles. Kids played in the yard. And my children were no longer visitors, but part of the rhythm. The doctor's report had sparked this change. But it was my persistence and my refusal to be diminished that made it real. I wasn't just 85. I was Evelyn Harper, gardener, writer, mother, friend. And I was still writing my story, one day at a time. Fall painted my world in amber and crimson, the leaves falling like memories I was learning to cherish again. At 85, I'd found a rhythm that felt like living, not just surviving. The house, once a battleground, was now a haven filled with the clatter of dishes from Claire's brunches, the laughter of Thomas's kids, the quiet agreements Margaret and I reached over glasses of wine. The doctor's report had been the spark, but the life I was building now was the flame. My memoir took shape, page by page. I wrote in the early mornings, when the house was still, the only sound the scratch of my pen. It wasn't easy, revisiting the raw moments, David's death, the nights I cried alone, the sting of my children's doubt. But I also wrote of joy, their first steps, our family camping trips, the way David's laugh filled a room. The words were a bridge. Not just for me, but for my family. A way to show them who I'd been and who I still was. One crisp October morning, Thomas arrived with a Surprizia laptop. "For your book," he said, grinning. "You can't keep writing by hand. Mom, this'll make it easier." I laughed, skeptical but curious. He spent the day teaching me, patient even when I grumbled about newfangled nonsense. By evening, I was typing, slowly but surely, my stories finding a new home in digital ink. It felt fitting, a blend of old and new, just like me. Margaret's visits grew warmer, less formal. She started joining the knitting circle, her lawyer's precision giving way to clumsy stitches and genuine laughter. One evening, as we sat tangled in yarn, she said, "I'm proud of you, Mom. I didn't realize how strong you were." Her words hit deep, a balm for wounds I hadn't fully acknowledged. "I've always been strong, Margaret," I said softly. "You just forgot for a while." She nodded, her eyes soft, and I saw my daughter again, the one who'd once run to me for comfort, now finding her way back. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Claire's brunches evolved into family gatherings, with Thomas and Margaret joining when they could. One Sunday, as we sat around the table, my grandson Max asked, "Grandma, were you ever scared?" I paused, the weight of his question settling. "All the time," I said. "When your grandpa died, when I raised your parents alone, when they thought I couldn't manage. But fear's just a signal to keep going." He nodded, his young face serious, and I realized I was teaching them not just to see me, but to face their own fears. That was my legacy, more than the house or the memoir showing them resilience, love, forgiveness. The knitting circle became a community, a tapestry of lives woven together. Sarah shared her grief, Ellen her wisdom, Maria her dreams. I listened, advised, sometimes just sat in silence, letting their stories fill the spaces mine couldn't. One night, Ellen said, "Evelyn, you've made this house a home for all of us." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that my fight wasn't just for me. It was for them, for the community I'd built, for the idea that age didn't diminish worth. I was 85, yes, but I was also a storyteller, a gardener, a friend, a woman who'd turned a challenge into a chance to shine. As winter approached, I looked at my life with new eyes. The doctor's report was a distant memory, its power not in the paper but in what it had sparked. I'd reclaimed my place, not by proving my children wrong, but by showing them who I was. And in doing so, I'd found myself again, Evelyn Harper, still growing, still fighting, still here. Winter settled over my home like a quiet guest. The air sharp, the garden dormant but promising spring. At 85, I'd learned to see seasons as cycles, not endings. My life was no different, each challenge a chance to grow, each victory a seed for the next. The doctor's report, now a faded echo, had been the catalyst, but the real story was what I'd built since, a family reconnected, a community alive, a memoir taking shape. The laptop Thomas gave me became my companion, its keys worn from my late-night writing. The memoir was nearly done, a tapestry of pain and joy, me husband's laughter, my children's betrayals, the strength I'd found to forgive. I wrote for my grandchildren, for the knitting circle, for myself. It was my voice, clear and unyielding, proof that 85 was not a curtain call, but a new act. Margaret joined me one snowy evening, her breath visible in the cold as we sat by the fire. "I read some of your chapters," she admitted, her voice soft. "I didn't know half of it how hard it was after Dad died. I'm sorry I doubted you." I reached for her hand, my grip steady. "You're here now? That's what matters." Her apology wasn't just words. It was in her presence, her willingness to listen. We talked late into the night, not as mother and lawyer, but as women, sharing stories of resilience and hope. Thomas's visits were now a constant, his kids filling the house with chaos and joy. One afternoon, as we built a snowman, he said, "You've changed how I see things. Mom, I thought age meant weakness. You proved it means strength." I smiled, rolling a snowball. Age just means you've got more stories to tell. Claire's brunches became feasts, the table crowded with family and friends. One icy morning, she raised a glass. "To Mom," she said, her voice thick, "for teaching us what it means to live." The toast brought tears, not of sadness, but of pride. I'd fought for my place, not just in this house, but in their hearts. The knitting circle grew, too, a haven for stories and stitches. Sarah found healing, Ellen purpose, Maria courage. They called me their anchor, but they were mine, too, a reminder that my fight had rippled beyond these walls. The memoir was finished by spring, printed and bound, a gift from my family. At the launch, a small gathering in my living room, I read a passage about forgiveness, my voice steady. "This house, this life, is ours," I said. "We built it together, through every storm." My children hugged me, their arms tight, their eyes bright with understanding. The doctor's report had been a battle, but this family, this community, this legacy was the war won. At 85, I wasn't just Evelyn Harper, the woman who'd defied doubt. I was the woman who'd shown the world that age was not a limit, but a beginning.